Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Kibler. I'm the manager of the meetings and events here at the Steele County Historical Society. Welcome. If you haven't yet had a chance to go through our exhibits, they will be open after the discussion tonight. They do close the end of February, so there's just one short month left to see them if you haven't seen them. I'm going to introduce you to Andre Koen with AM Horizons. Also teaches at Adler Graduate. Is teaching the right word?
Yeah, teaching. Yep. So I teach there. I also I teach at Bethel.
At Bethel College.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Andre and I have known each other about 15 years. He has been a diversity trainer with Anoka County.
Yeah. No, I taught high school.
Okay.
So so I've had a number of places where I've engaged with the community, and so hopefully some of that stuff has given me some things to actually talk about that can actually be helpful in our conversation.
So, and afterwards we will do a Q&A, so if you do have questions, he'll stick around for a while and answer hopefully anything you throw at him.
Yeah. No, I'm excited. So
I'll hand it off to you, and thanks for coming, guys.
yeah, let's give Stephanie a hand. So I'm always curious when we engage in these conversations of what people's motivations are, and so I want to make sure that the conversation that we have meets some of your expectations, and so to meet those expectations, or hopefully to exceed those expectations, I like to kind of know why you chose to take your life energy and spend it in a conversation with with other community members on this particular topic. And everyone doesn't have to speak, but if you have something that you feel is really compelling, that really motivated you to come out tonight, or things you are hoping to talk about, please share. So what motivated you to come out tonight, or what were you hoping we might talk about?
I was motivated to come out so I can miss some of the inauguration stuff.
Okay, so you're trying to get out of the inauguration stuff, all that footage. All right. Yes.
I'm used to living in a diverse community, and now I've moved to Owattana. and so I was just simply curious about people coming out to this.
All right. Cool. So you were in a more diverse community, and now you're in a differently diverse community, right? I'd imagine that Nords and Swedes would tell you that there is a lot of diversity here. Right? Yeah. Other folks, what motivated you? What were you hoping we would talk about? Yes, sir.
I was very interested when I first heard Black Lives Matter, and I was so naive that I didn't think anybody would ever say that it didn't, or
Right.
something like that.
Okay.
With I should say the comments against it, and so then it became All Lives Matter, and I was interested to see Blue Lives Matter. I hadn't heard that one before.
All right. So you wanted to kind of hear what this evolution, or what some of that pushback was on those concepts. All right, cool. Yes.
Where Owattana is becoming gradually more diverse, but we don't interact. We don't interact with the Hispanic people. We don't interact with the Somali people, unless you're clerk in a store.
Right. So we are becoming more diverse, but we're not interacting. And so part of your some of the things you want to talk about is possibly how we could or should interact. All right. Cool. A couple more things. Yes.
Well, I think we Minnesotans have kind of felt that we were more liberal, maybe more accepting, and some of the events in the last year or so have kind of pointed out to me that we have a lot more bias than we've taken credit for, probably, and it's just, it just appears in the news almost daily, so.
All right. So our biases are appearing in the news as opposed to appearing in the mirror. Right. So, and we'll talk about that. Yeah, so we'll talk about that. Yes.
To help create open dialogue for my kids who are not.
Who are your kids? That
These two.
no, I'm saying they don't need any other. They don't need any other adjective other than the fact that they're your kids.
Right, and I want to learn how and encourage open dialogue for them to be comfortable with people that don't look like them and help people who don't look like them be comfortable with them.
Yep. Well, cool. Hopefully we'll get to that. Hopefully we'll get to that. Anything else you were hoping? Yes.
I'm just curious how we got to this point, that all of a sudden we have to be reminded that any lives matter.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, how did we get there?
Yeah. How did we
And I
get to
don't
this
know if
place?
It's part of this, but
I-
it's surprising. I mean, we lost something along the way.
Yeah. You know what did it? What was Johnny Carson's wingman's name?
Ed McMahon.
Ed McMahon did it.
Oh, God, no.
It's Ed McMahon's fault. What show did Ed McMahon start after Carson went off the air? Do anybody remember in the 80s? Star Search. Do you remember that show? It was kind of a talent show, a better version of the Gong Show, and not as sophisticated as Lawrence Welk, right? Not as sophisticated as Lawrence Welk, but yeah. So we started looking at this idea of me, and when we look for me, we miss other people. Right? We miss other people. So we'll certainly talk about how we got to this place. And I'm joking that it's Ed McMahon's fault. It's really not his fault. But this idea of that my star is important and that my star should be used for my stuff has gotten us kind of to this point. Is anyone familiar with Ayn Rand? Ayn Rand, right? So she wrote a couple of books that I would suggest that people pay attention to. One is called The Fountainhead, and the other is Atlas Shrugged. And Ayn's position makes sense in a lot of ways, right? That has led us to this position. She believes that the most important and most valuable person in your sphere of influence is you. That's what she believes. I believe that there's some faultiness to that logic because I cannot be unless we be. So I am born in a context. I'm born in relationships with people. So I can't be this rugged individualist because I'm connected to people. But I am important. But I'm not any more or less important than what I can provide in the context of what is needed. So we'll talk a little bit about that stuff as well. What were some things you were hoping we weren't going to talk about? Like, if I hear this one more time, my head will explode. Were there any things that you were hoping we would not talk about?
The existence of white privilege.
The existence of white privilege. Yeah, that typically in these kinds of conversations, that kind of stuff always comes up or is a part of the conversation, and I would like to suggest that we think about that idea of white privilege a little bit differently, right? So, to be quite honest, I walk into this room with a certain amount of privilege. I walk into the room with privilege, most of which I did not ask for. I am a cisgendered male, which means that the way I see myself and my physiology, the way I present is very traditionally male. I'm heterosexual. I speak English. I'm 6'2". I'm mildly attractive. And extremely humble. Right? But I didn't ask for any of those things. And the fact that I have an education is an extension of those other privileges that I was granted. So we all walk into the room with privilege. I'm not embarrassed or ashamed of my privilege. I'm not embarrassed of the decisions that my parents made, good and or bad, because they have created who I am. And I don't want you to feel negatively either about who you are. But one thing that we have to recognize, and I think we touched a little bit on it in terms of that bias not showing up in our mirror, but showing up on our television screens. If I don't take account of my privilege, that privilege can easily become a weapon. That I become the center of the universe and I get to define everything and everyone around me, as opposed to being curious and being in relationships with folks. And so, does white privilege exist? I'm not sure. But I do know that we all have things that we didn't ask for and that we didn't earn by our own hands that have given us an advantage in one shape, way, form, or another. Right? So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's something that a lot of people oftentimes don't want to talk about because it's filled with blame and shame and guilt and fault. And how many people know that the only person that can motivate you with those things is your mother? If your boss tried to motivate you that way, that's not going to go over very well. But it's something about a mother's love that those things seem to work. It's a joke about my own family. So, other things that people were hoping we would not talk about. Yes.
45 years ago, I was in the Army, and we all made the same money. All I heard, though, was 400 years ago, this is why I'm where I'm at. 400 years ago. I said, what's that got to do with you today?
That's a really good point, right? So a lot of times when we get into these conversations, people want to bring up the past and bring up things that we personally had no contribution to. We didn't participate in. What I'd like to challenge you to think, though, is just that those privileges that you have are on the shoulders of other people who sacrificed for you to have those things. And that in some cases, we did not all start off on the same footing. And so, I understand that 400 years piece that they're talking about, and I'm not concerned because people will catch up. It just might take an additional 400 years for them to catch up, right? But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that. Or we won't talk about that specifically, but we'll identify what about that is important to at least recognize, right? Let's get started. In your handout, there's a booklet, and in this booklet on page 3, there are 5 gray circles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what I'd like for you to do, as best you can, is to write one thing that you value in each one of those circles. And if you know shorthand, feel free to use shorthand or abbreviations. You will be spelling that out as part of the activity. So if you can just give yourself a shorthand or write one thing that you value in each one of those. It could be a person, like a significant other, a grandchild, a friend. It could be a concept like justice or freedom. It could be a place like Bemidji or Belize. It could be a thing like a cabin home or a motorcycle. All right? So one thing that you value in each one of those circles. We'll talk about the configuration, but go ahead and just do those gray circles, and then we'll get to that big circle in just a second. All right, we'll stop right there. I'm sure most people have at least 4, if not all 5. What I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to go around the room and find as many people who have something in common with one of the things that you wrote on your paper. When you find those individuals, have them put their initial to the thing that you have in common with them. All right? You have 90 seconds to do this.
When you got to get close, I said, I'll just.
Yeah, no, we're good. 30 seconds! 4, 3, 2, 1. And game over. Thank you so much for participating in. So as you went around the room and you looked at the things that you wrote down on your paper, were there things that you saw on someone else's paper and you were like, I should have thought about that. Why didn't I write that down? What were some of those things? You were waving your hand in the back. What was one of those things for you? Travel. So you saw that on someone else's paper and said, I should have wrote that down. All right? Yes. Health. Right? Yes. Freedom. You saw that and said that was something important. I saw a hand. Okay. Cool. Freedom and health. Right? Yes. Education. Speaking of education, I watched the part of the confirmation hearing that President Donald Trump had appointed Ms. DeVos to her thing, right? So I'm on social media, and I get things on social media. So on social media, I got this thing that said that she said that we should have guns in schools for bears. Right? For grizzlies is what she said, right? So when I heard that, I was like, oh my goodness, she is a wacko. Oh my goodness, she is just wacko. Then with my class, my education class, I have teachers, I'm teaching teachers about educational equity. So we watched it ourselves. We actually watched the whole context of what she said. And they took that piece out of context. So she's, it's a surprise, right? So what possibly could be the context? This is the context. Senator Enzi from Wyoming is concerned about his schools, where there are grizzly bears at his school that come to the school. So they have built fences around the school to keep the grizzly bears away from the children. So when she made that comment, it was in response to a comment that she made earlier to Mr. Enzi, and she said, I think or I suppose that they probably have guns for the grizzly bears at the school. Context is everything. And so now I'm looking at my feed and I'm questioning what I'm being fed through my social media, right? It's quite egregious what happened. Now, so while I'm on this tip, I want to get this off my chest so we can move on freely. I and my church, it's not me, it's not about me. I and my church did a voter registration drive. So we registered people to vote. Now, I have to say I was really dismayed and confused to some of the questions that I got from voters, people who are voting age, about the process. One individual asked me, how much does it cost to register to vote? Very sad. But I walked them through it, right? So I walked them because that's what we do. I do talks like this all over the place, and so I believe that I'm doing my part. Yes?
Was this person somebody that had been in the United States a long time or just moved to the United States?
This was someone who should know better, who's been here long enough gone through our education system, pays taxes, gets refunds, should know how this stuff works, right? So I think that I do my part. And I want to be transparent that the candidate that I wanted didn't run, but I voted for another candidate that didn't win. So I'll just put that out there. So what that means for me is that I have to recognize that there's a pilot on a plane that I didn't choose. And the last time I flew Delta Airlines, I didn't get to choose that pilot either. I didn't get to choose a pilot. But when I flew on Delta, I didn't choose the pilot. Actually, I didn't really have any opinion about the pilot, but I wanted the pilot to be successful. So we have a pilot in Donald Trump. Whatever I feel about that, whatever I think about that is irrelevant to the fact that 51% decided. And I want the pilot to get me to my destination safely. Another analogy that I like to use in this time, and this relates to all the stuff we're talking about today. I haven't gone too far off script, but the other analogy is that of a long trip, right? So I don't know if you've had fathers like my father, but the only person who drove was my dad. And so we would make trips to, we lived in Dayton, Ohio. We'd make trips to Tennessee or to Arkansas, and my father drove every mile of that trip. And we're back in the back, with our legs crossed, praying that the car runs out of gas so we can go to the bathroom because he wasn't stopping, right? But it's very interesting that all of us had a responsibility in that car as my father is driving, even when he shouldn't be driving. We all have a responsibility in that car. And what was our responsibility to this driver, who in some cases shouldn't be driving, but won't give up the wheel? What was our responsibility? Keep him awake. Make sure he's on the road, that he's got a map, that because we didn't have Siri back in those days. I was one of those generations, we didn't grow up with, GPS. The GPS was mom sitting with the map, making so that's how we grew up, right? And so our responsibility is to pay attention and make sure that whomever is driving our car is awake and is focused and is being diligent and adhering to the great and sacred document, the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution of the United States. And so as you were going around the room and you saw things that were alike, did you see some things, or were there some things that were difficult to find people to sign on, or more difficult than other things? What was one of those things for someone? Yes?
Dignity and love.
Dignity and love. If you value dignity and love, even if it wasn't written on your paper, please raise your hand. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. What was another that was difficult or you didn't find someone to sign on? It's blank.
Myself.
Yourself, right? So if you value yourself, please raise your hand. I hope everyone would, right? All right, one more. Yes. Work. If you value work, even if it's not written on your paper, please raise your hand. Right? So what do you think is the goal of this particular activity? What's the
Searching commonalities.
Searching commonalities.
Respecting diversity.
Respecting diversity. We can usually find something in common with some other person. And why is that? How is that possible that we can find something? Because we're human. Because we're human. I don't have to know exactly your life experience. I don't have to walk in your shoes. And in some of your cases, you wouldn't want me to do that anyway, right? But I've been hungry. I've never been starving. I've had my heart broken. I know what that feels like. I've been a winner, I've been a loser, I've had someone die, I've watched something and someone be born. I'm human. And so part of how we've gotten here is that we have forgotten our own humanity. And when we forget our humanity, it becomes so much easier to forget other people's humanity. We all have an immigrant story. We all have a story of being someplace else and then being here. Whether we were brought by our own will and volition, whether we were run off of a piece of land into a smaller place, we all have these stories of being one place and then coming to another. I would imagine many of you have ancestors who probably came from another place and ended up here in Minnesota. When your ancestors left, did they speak the language that was required for the land they were going to? No, they did not. I would imagine that most of them did not. But what did they do once they got here? They learned the language. Now, what was the gap between them coming here and them learning the language?
Friend needs.
It varied. And what was the variable? What was the space for that variable? Yes. Willingness. School. People. And time. And time. In our microwave society, we want things to happen. Yesterday is too late. Right? We want things to happen automatically. But these new refugees and these new immigrants are coming here just as our ancestors did, and they need time. Yeah, they'll learn the language. They have to. It's the language of commerce, of getting things done. But it takes time. Does anyone remember riding a bicycle? Yeah? Did you just hop on that sucker and you go, whoa, I'm out of here?
Yeah, end up in a rose bush.
Yeah, she said, yes, and I ended up in a rose bush. Right? No, it took time to do those things, right? And so sometimes when we have these influx of individuals, they're not allotted the kind of time that many of our ancestors were given or had as a luxury. Because time was slower then, right? The pace was slower, so they could learn and develop and all of these things. But now the fast-paced world of the internet and microwaves has, I think, exacerbated a problem that we don't have enough time or spend enough time connecting with one another, right? So we have all of these people, but we don't connect because we're too busy. We're too busy. Right? So thank you for that. We'll come back to that big circle in just a second. I want to go back to page 1 and talk about this idea of moral positioning. So there was a great man who had a dream. And we just celebrated his birthday on Monday. And one of the things that I would encourage us to think about is the fact that Martin Luther King... It's funny what we do to dead people without voices. Dead people without voices. I would imagine that your family, very much like mine, had riffraff in your family. Scoundrels. Right? What happens at the scoundrel's funeral? Boy, they get a lot of praise. Right? No, every now and then there's, after a couple of drinks, somebody will start being honest about the scoundrel and then just let all their business hang out. But up until that point, we say just the nicest things about those scoundrels because we want people to remember that stuff. But I want you to remember that Dr. King was a troublemaker. A troublemaker. He blocked streets. He kept people from getting their lattes. He was a disruptor. And so now that he doesn't have a voice, it's easy for us to turn him into Martin Luther the Lamb, right? The Lamb of Peace. There's only one lamb, but that's a whole nother conversation, right? So we try to turn those things, but he was a troublemaker in his time. People didn't want to hear what he had to say. He was disrupting people's reality. He wrote this letter, and I'd encourage you to read it. It's on the internet. It's on. You can get it on your phone. Called "The Letter from a Birmingham Jail," and he wrote this letter as a Christian pastor to other Christian pastors, because other Christian pastors suggested to Martin that he was going to fast. That with time we will get there. And what Martin was saying was, in 1863, we signed, the Emancipation Proclamation was given. It's now 1964. Martin wants to know, how much time do we need? And so they were trying to chastise him. And he said, brothers in the faith, don't chastise me. Join me. Talk about these things in your congregations. And so that letter really talks about this idea that justice delayed is, in fact, justice denied. And so his children, the students of his actions and his behaviors, many of which have become this place, this space that is held called Black Lives Matter. And we'll talk more about that in just a second. But he says some very interesting things that are demonstrated in this picture. I try to do graphic representations so you can get mental pictures of our concepts. And so he gave this speech called the Mountaintop Speech. And in this Mountaintop Speech, he has this line where he says, I have seen the promised land and we will make it. I might not make it, but we will make it. What was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King making reference to in that particular speech? The story of Moses and the Exodus, right? You know, Charlton Heston. Let my people go out of my cold, dead hands. No, that's his NRA speech. I get those things confused, right? But he says, I won't make it to the promised land, but we will. Now, oddly enough, or prophetically enough, Dr. King gives this speech the night before his assassination. And he says, I might not make it, but we will make it. And so, just like the children of Israel, without the leadership of Moses, someone steps up and they make it to the promised land. But when Martin says, I won't make it, but we will, who is he talking about?
All the rest of the people.
Each of us. I want you to really think about this and be critical about this. That you can be someone's liberator. You can help someone if you get over your embarrassment. If you get out the way, you can actually help somebody. What I mean by that. So I was in a grocery store and I saw something go down that was very disrespectful and distasteful. And as I'm watching this thing unfold, I say to myself, what other people who also saw the same thing said to themselves, which is what? This is none of my business, right? But every so often, I get this courage to do things that I'm not prepared for or qualified for. And there's a still small voice that speaks to me and says, speak. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding. I'm not prepared for this. This is a bad situation. And the voice said, speak. Because I know the voice and I trust it, and I'm rooted in recognizing what that is, I prepare myself. So it was one of these situations that sometimes happens in public places where there's a domestic relationship that is being challenged by one partner or the other, and one of them is being disrespectful to the other, and it's very intense, and it's very public and very dramatized, and I was compelled to have conversations in the midst of that. Never been in that situation before. But I walked to the situation, and I asked to speak with the young man in this particular case, and I said, sir, can I share something with you? Now, I'm afraid that if I say the wrong thing, that this woman will get in more trouble. So I'm praying that I'm given the right thing. And so the voice says, say what I tell you to say. So I open my mouth, and this is what comes out. Sir, if you want her to grow, you have to water her and give her sunshine. I was so impressed with that. I repeated it so I could understand it. And the young man looks at me. And he goes, I say, sir, do you understand? And he looks at me and he says, yeah, I do. I do. Great, sir. Have a great day. I'm out of here. Right? I did what I was supposed to do. But that's a marathon for me, right? So I've been prepared. I have had all these little steps that have prepared me to take that big plunge and to step in situations that other folks would not yet. But I'm not asking you to run a marathon like I am. I'm asking you, in your sphere of influence, get people to think about their behaviors and be compassionate to them as they engage in trying to figure out what it means to be human. And so when Dr. King talked about making it to that promised land, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about us figuring out how to connect arm in arm and link with our commonalities, those circles that we have that we may not necessarily see. I believe that we want similar things, but we believe that there are different ways to getting there. And that I can work with. I can work with that. Because we all don't want the same car, which is why there are many car companies, right? You know, some people like inferior cars. I prefer BMWs, but you know that was a little joke. So there's that. And so if you go down to the bottom of that page, it's really important to recognize this idea of the human soul. And so there are tons of things that are trying to break the soul, trying to crack the soul, trying to prevent the soul from growing and developing. And I would suggest that racism, that ageism, that adultism, that all forms of oppression, even kind of heterosexism, are things that are designed to minimize people's perception of their own soul. And some people will use a word called dehumanization. Has anyone ever heard that word before? Right? I would like to suggest to you that is an illusion. You have 46 chromosomes. There is nothing that can change that. There's no treatment that people can give you that will diminish the number of chromosomes that you have. You are always human, even if they trick you out of it. And so when we say this idea that Black Lives Matter, sure they matter. 46 chromosomes. All lives matter, 46 chromosomes. Blue lives matter, 46 chromosomes. But often we have to make, for political reasons, or people have goals for making us have to choose between one set of 46 chromosomes and another. And I suggest that we don't have to choose. They can all be true simultaneously. So let's turn to page 4. And I do want to double check my time. It is now 8 o'clock. We're going to what time? 8:30? 8? What time are we going to? Who knows? Okay, well, Yeah, if you can check for me, sir, I'd appreciate it.
Whenever you finish.
Oh, really? Oh, it's on. So my dad was a Pentecostal pastor, so I will not subject you. So we will have to have an end time. So, on page 4 is something that I hold very dear and close and dear to my heart. The preamble to the Constitution of the United States. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare and the securing of blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We do ordain and establish the Constitution for the United States of America. Love it. This is my document. Now, here's the interesting thing. People will say to me, well, Andre, when they wrote this, they weren't considering people like you. I'm not sure what they're talking about, 6'2", mildly attractive. I'm not sure what kind of people like me they're talking about. But I'll tell you right now that my lifeblood runs in this document. That red, that white, and that blue, my blood is on that flag too. Right? And so, no, I'm grafted into this. This is also my country. And I remember in the Declaration of Independence, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Love it. True. Good. 1776. What is also happening simultaneously in 1776? What economic system are we participating in? Slavery. So we have the Constitution and slavery at the same time. Freedom, not freedom. So how do we reconcile that? We create some inventions to help us reconcile that. And one of those inventions is this idea of race. So 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation is signed. And what does that say? What does the Emancipation Proclamation say? Or suggest that what?
All men are created equal.
That all men are created equal, and that people who are held in the system of slavery in the South will be set free. Now, there are questions as to how benevolent this act was, right? So was this an act of altruism and benevolence on behalf of President Lincoln, or was he trying to destabilize the South for more political gain? So there are those ways of thinking about it. However, whatever his motives were, I'm glad it happened. I'm glad it happened. August 18th, 1920, what happens? Women get the right to participate in this great democracy. Right? I am woman, hear me roar. Right? And so please, give energy to that march in Washington, or if there's celebrations tomorrow on Saturday in your local community, give energy to that, because I think this is one of those things that should be recognized, right? But then we've also had some parts of our evolution as a country that weren't such proud moments, right? Like Executive Order 9066. Are people familiar with that executive order? It was the internment camps of the Japanese. One of those darker days of our existence. Something that the people at the time thought was necessary to prevent further harm. And what I would suggest is, if we don't pay attention, we have to learn from history, or we're doomed to repeat it. Right? And then 1964, the Civil Rights Act is signed, and the Civil Rights Act does two things. It ends segregation, and it defines discrimination. So it becomes a legal tool that people can use to identify bad behaviors in the workplace. And then in 1978, the Native American Freedom of Religion Act is signed, so Native Americans can finally worship the way they want to, as that act is signed in 1978. Pause for the irony, right? And then 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so those are some of the contexts that we have to kind of recognize as we talk about this idea of sharing this reality with other people. That Black Lives Matter, that Blue Lives Matter, that all lives matter. And so to that end, if we can turn to page, let me make sure I got the right page. Yeah, let's turn to page 10. So we all come from a context. We have parents who did the best they could with what they had to teach us about a world that we would inherit. Love my parents, but they never could have taught me about the proper grammar used in texting. Why could my parents have not taught me about the proper grammar for texting? Because it was the future, right? They could not teach me about things they did not know. And so what I want you to know is that your parents, your guardians, did the best they could with what they had to give you their best, and it would have always been inadequate. So cut them a break. Right? So cut them a break. And so when we talk about Black lives, blue lives, and all lives, what we're really saying is that human lives matter. But we have some real problems around how certain members of our community are being treated. And so I don't know if you've heard this term before. Has anyone heard the term black on black crime? Anyone ever heard of that? Yeah. Why is it that we don't hear of white on white crime? Interesting, right? Just like they took the Secretary of Education's words out of context, maybe that concept is also out of context. So many of us, anyone grow up on a farm or near a farm? All right, cool. What's the advantage of having a farmhouse with a very long driveway? What's the advantage of that?
Peace and quiet.
Peace and quiet. What else? So animals who are away from the road.
No salesman bother you.
Yeah, no salesman, right? That's probably the biggest advantage, except for the Schwann's guy, because he's always bringing ice cream, right? Schwann's guy. Yeah, but you can see people coming. Right? So nobody can really sneak up on you because you can see them coming because it was sparsely populated. So what did crime look like in those communities that were sparsely populated? High crime or low crime? Low crime, right? Because people are spaced out. If somebody's coming to talk, you know they're coming, you can engage them, you can prepare for them, all those kinds of things. Anyone grew up in a city? Big city, because a city is not the same as the farm, right? Right? So in the city, how close are your neighbors? Probably 15, 20, maybe 40 feet away. Where on the farm, they are miles away from. What's the crime like when people are so close to each other? It increases. So maybe black on black crime is not a racial thing, but but a spatial thing. Maybe. Maybe. And so if we start being critical thinkers about the things that we're given, then we get to recognize some other things. And one of the things I think is really interesting, it wasn't until people started saying that Black Lives Matter, that other people other than anti-abortionists were saying all lives matter. Before people started saying Black Lives Matter, I don't know if anybody sees those lovely those lovely road signs that say, when at 10 weeks I had philosophical thoughts, right? Or I can wiggle my toes at, so you seen those posters? And the font is a little weird, and sometimes, the babies' faces are a little, inappropriate for the, not very model-esque, right? But they were saying all lives matter, and no one was complaining. But when people started saying Black Lives Matter, given what was happening in our community, people started to take offense to that. And so what I would suggest is, if we don't identify a problem, if we don't call it out, if we don't call the problem out, then it's hard to recognize it. Can you imagine going to your physician, your family physician, and your physician saying, you're having some symptoms, right? You're like, when I move my arm, it just kind of falls over. And the physician said, you know what, I think you're just sick. Is that helpful? No, right? So if your arm is kind of flopping over, what might you want the physician to recognize? That maybe my arm is broken. So he calls the problem so that it can be fixed. And so the suggestion that other lives don't matter, that's not the point. The point really is, let's call attention to something that has been a problem. All lives they all matter. They're all important. But we have some problems that we have to address with this. So there's also a concept that I didn't put in my notes, but I want to just offer to you that called implicit bias. Has anyone ever heard of this concept of implicit bias? Implicit bias? Okay. Anyone familiar with a comedian by the name of Nipsey Russell? Right? Flip Wilson? Right? So Flip Wilson is, I don't know if people know Tyler Perry. So Tyler Perry does this Medea character. He dresses up as a woman. Flip Wilson was one of, actually there was a white comedian who did it, was probably the first to do it after vaudeville. Does anyone remember what his name was? Milton Berle, right? So Milton Berle does this, and then it becomes this kind of shtick that comedians do sometimes. And so there was a guy named Flip Wilson who did this, and he had a character named Geraldine. And when Geraldine would do something naughty, something that's not nice, what was her line? The devil made me do it, right? The devil made me do it. So I think about that, and I think about how that would have flown in my parents' house, right? So why did you eat up all the cookies and nobody else has cookies? And what if I had said to my mother, the devil made me do it? Would she have said, oh, okay, that's fine. You're okay, good. Well, would your parents have accepted that? No. But we accept this thing called implicit bias. And the concept of implicit bias is that we have these biases that we don't know about, and they make us do things that are outside of our control. I like to challenge that because I believe that we are held accountable for everything we do. It's like saying, guns, they don't kill people. Bullets kill people. Right? Is that the case? No. People with guns, with bullets, make that happen. Right? And so we have to start taking responsibility for that. And part of that is to not get tired of hearing other people's stories. Because I want someone to listen to my story. It's funny, on Jeopardy, every February they have Black History trivia. And no one ever picks. That's the last category to be picked. And why do you think that is? Because people typically don't know what it is, or they feel uncomfortable. They don't want to be embarrassed by that stuff, which lets me know that we don't know enough about our neighbors. Right? So do we know why the Hmong are here? The Hmong are here because of something called the Secret War. We made a deal with them that if you helped us fight this secret war, you and your descendants can come to the United States as your reward for helping us out. Most of us don't know that. That many of the refugees that are coming from Somalia actually were particularly early on, were people who helped us fight their civil war so that our enemies, who were their enemies, would not rule that particular country and extend more things that we don't want extended in the world. So we said, you know what? We'll take you because you helped us out. Did you know that Liberia is our daughter country? That we birthed the country of Liberia. President James Monroe said, you know what? We will send slaves back to Africa. And so they did. And thus, the state of liberty of Liberia was born, with its capital city being James Monrovia. So when they went into chaos, when they went into civil war, they asked for our help, and because it's our daughter country, what do you think we said? Yeah, we'll take you. We'll take you. But one of the things that oftentimes doesn't happen is we're not taught all of this nuance of history, and so we see these others and we think that they don't have a purpose, and they're coming. It's like your kids invite their friends over to your house, but they didn't tell you. Has that ever happened to somebody, right? Yeah. How do you approach that kid that's coming unannounced? They came unannounced, but they were invited, right? So as we think about this idea of let's be critical thinking in these things, because all evil needs is for us not to be thinking and for us to react from our primal brain that looks at fear and there's some studies that suggest that in our primal brain are these instincts of fear of the other, which is natural and evolutionary. But to be human means to rise above my evolutionary tendencies, right? To be in cognitive control. And so it's funny because people will ask the question, do you agree with everything that Black Lives Matter does? And my answer is no. But I also didn't agree with everything my parents did. And I might not agree with everything you do. But I'll always fight for your right to do it. Even if I don't agree, and even if it's not my thing, you have the right to do it. And so when we think about these police shootings, and we think about the characterization of people, I would suggest that there are probably bad people who get shot. It's the nature of the business. But I also suggest that when we start seeing these patterns of individuals who aren't armed, who have some questionable things, that we should ask some critical questions, both of ourselves and of our neighbors. And I don't think there's any harm in questioning, asking questions, particularly if I don't understand. And I typically don't deal with specific instances. I look for patterns of behavior. I like to address patterns of behavior because anybody could trip up just once. But when we see patterns of behavior, those are the kinds of things that we need to identify. And so on the back page, on page 12, I just want to leave you with this, that there is dignity and honor in being human. And it is our responsibility to help people remind themselves of their humanity. And the more we're able to do that, the more, if I can at least listen to someone and recognize that maybe black lives do matter. Maybe all lives do matter. And I certainly need to talk with my police officers and support them. Even when they've done wrong, I have to support them because they do right more often than they do wrong. And so, so what is dignity? What is dignity? Realizing who we are. Is it something that you just have, or is it something you can give to someone else? It is in fact both. And so we have to have dignity as we get, and actually I would suggest that we actually get dignity when we give it to someone else. Right? Honor is the highest form of respect. And who in our society have we said we're supposed to honor? Vets. Servicemen and women who fight on our behalf, mostly doing things that I'm not brave enough to do myself. So we honor them. Who else do we honor? Our parents, our grandparents, senior citizens, right? Teachers. We honor these people because they do great things. What if you honored a stranger? What might that do for you, and what might that do for that stranger? You might be surprised that they might not be a stranger much longer. And then being, we all accepted an invitation to be here on this planet. I don't want to think about how that invitation came. It's very disgusting. But we all accepted an invitation to be here on the planet, and we're trying to figure out what it means to be human. And human has two definitions. One is that of being a biped, having opposable thumbs, a big brain, and a belly button. If you ever encounter a person without a belly button, be concerned. And human also is defined as an adjective. How do you want to be described? How do we describe the best of our characters? And what would you say? What does it mean to be human? That we're the top of the heap.
Created like God.
That we're created like God.
Care about others.
That we care about others.
That we have feelings.
That we have feelings. That we can learn, that we can change, and that we can grow.
And we can love.
And that we can love. There's and even if you can't love someone, do you know how you can get closer? You can get as close to love as you possibly can without loving them. You want to know the secret to that? Anybody? Anybody?
You have to love yourself.
So you have to love yourself. But if you can't love them, the closest you can get to loving them
Respect.
is listening to them.
Respecting.
Is listening to them. And so I encourage you as you move throughout your community, as we go through this change in presidential philosophy together, that if you don't take anything away, take away the fact and the point that we can and have to listen to one another, because that's the only way understanding can happen. And if we don't learn from the past, what happens? We repeat it. My name is Andre Koen. Thank you so much for your time. So are there any burning questions that people had specifically about kind of what we came to speak about? Yes.
Just, I don't know if it was a question, but at the beginning you asked what Owattana came here for.
Yes.
And I wanted to know why it matters now versus, why all of a sudden we're worried about this.
Yeah.
I don't know if my conclusion's right or not, but I think it always was that lives didn't matter, or we had to be reminded. It's just that it's magnified over time, that if you go back same little problems, but as farmers and that spread out, and now all of a sudden, it's magnified itself by us being so close together.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm right on that,
No,
but I
but
think,
I think
it's
you're,
something that everyone has dealt with.
you're onto that, right? I mean, you're onto something. Does anyone have one of those smartphones? Can somebody pull up the 13th Amendment to the Constitution? Can someone pull that up on their smartphone? The 13th Amendment to the Constitution.
Abolishment of slavery.
Yes. But I want it read. I want it, if somebody can read it as it's written. Yeah, anybody who has a smartphone, if you can pull it out.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you.
Well, just one other quick thing, sorry. You mentioned, these are all my notes here. We take offense to Black Lives Matter, and we maybe shouldn't, but those that rally around it, do they want us to take offense to it? Isn't that their purpose? And this is my question in my mind.
Yeah. Well, so this is what I know. My job and my calling are forums like this. I am protesting right now. I don't have control over what other people do. And those may be, in fact, some of their motives. I do know that when people get to a point where they feel like they have no more outlets, that's what demonstrations is what they do. They try to demonstrate the pain and anguish that they have. Whether I like it or agree with it actually has no bearing on the decisions that they make. So in some cases, certainly, they want to raise awareness and they want to help make people as uncomfortable as they feel that they are. And so, yeah, right? So I want to get back to kind of why we've gotten to this place, right? So this idea of Black Lives Matter and why we've gotten to. So if you can read the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, I'd appreciate it.
So the 13th Amendment to the Constitution declared that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted.
Okay, stop right there just for a second. Does somebody else have a smartphone?
Home charging.
I mean, right, can you look something up for me? Can you look up something called the Black Codes? Black Codes. And then is there one other person who has a smartphone they can grab? Can you look up something called White Codes? All right? So when was that ratified? Does it say when it was ratified?
Let's see here. And, let's see, debated, there's a long list.
Okay, so I'll just,
We can hear her.
yep, so I'll just repeat what she says so that everyone can hear. So I asked her when was it ratified, and she's looking for that, but don't worry about it. Just go back to the top. I'm going to have you read it once again, and I'll repeat what you say. So,
All right.
so can you read it once again?
Yes. And by the way, it was ratified in 1865.
Okay, so ratified in 1865. I was going to say that, but I'm glad that you found it. All right?
Yeah. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude,
Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude,
except as a punishment for crime,
except for punishment of a crime,
whereof the party shall have been duly convicted.
wherein the party would be duly convicted. You can stop right there. All right? So let's go back to the first part of that again. So read that again.
Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude.
No, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except, stop right there.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Whoa. I got a bully on the playground. He gets a conversion. He says, I'm not going to be a bully anymore. I stopped being a bully, except on Tuesdays. Has he stopped being a bully? No. So 1865 is important. What did you come up with white codes, ma'am?
White codes?
Yes?
I think of all kind of weird stuff.
Like Pokemon? Did Pokemon come up?
Cheat codes for Pokemon.
Cheat codes for Pokemon, right? Now let's go to black codes.
In the United States, the Black Codes were laws passed by southern states in 1865.
Whoa, stop right there. Wait a minute. We got the Constitution of the United States being ratified in 1865. Then southern states say,
After the Civil War, these laws had the intent and the effect of restricting African Americans' freedom and of compelling them to work in a labor economy based on low wages or debt.
stop right there. That is why Black Lives Matter. Right? So what we did, go ahead. I thought somebody was, okay. Yep, so I'll say what she said again. Can you read it once again? I'll repeat it.
In the United States,
In the United States,
the Black Codes were laws
the Black Codes were laws
passed by southern states
in 1865 after the Civil War.
These laws had the intent and the effect
These laws had the intent and the effect
of restricting African Americans' freedom
of restricting African Americans' freedom
and of compelling them to work in a labor economy
and compelling them to work in a labor economy
based on low wages or debt.
based on low wages or debt. They criminalized in 1865, after the Constitution's been ratified, they criminalized black people. Now here is the mystery for us. We love whipping up on the South. We love it. But the South made products and they didn't sell them to themselves. Who'd they sell them to? To the North. Now I heard a friend say this, and he's true. People don't like to know how their hot dogs are made. Or sausage, or bratwurst, right? And so when we look at it from that point of view, we have to recognize that the criminality of black people became laws. There are no such thing as white people didn't have those kind of laws or restrictions, but black people did. And then over time it morphed and it changed. And so now when we look at our prison population, there's a film that I'd encourage you to look at on Netflix. Anybody have Netflix? It's called 13th. It's called 13th. So check that out. I will say that it leans a little bit on the liberal side of things, more than I would appreciate. But they call attention to one of my favorite presidents and how evil and dastardly one of my favorite presidents was. And that was President Bill Clinton. Evil, dastardly. I loved him. It was funny. Someone asked me, they said, well, if Bill Clinton had told you that his marriage to his wife was one of convenience, that he was a sex addict, that he would destroy the American economy through NAFTA, ship jobs overseas as a part of that stuff, would you have voted for him? And I looked at him square in the face and I said, yes. And they said, why? I said, because he was on the Arsenio Hall show. That was my favorite show at the time. And so, right? So all that other stuff didn't matter. It was that I liked to do. But in hindsight, as we mature, we can see kind of the errors of our ways. And actually, he has made public apologies for the creation of mass incarceration that we have today. And so we just need to be mindful that history tells the story of success and failures. And so that's all I have to say about that. Any other questions?
How does Pokemon fit into all this?
Pokemon has nothing to do with any of this stuff. And that was the point. Right? So I want to say thank you. If there are no other questions, if there are individual questions, I'm here to answer them. So thank you. Let me turn this off because our conversation recorded. Yes, sir.
The question I have is, how much longer will this go in that before accountability comes into the picture? When Black Lives Matter does all the roads and bridges and all this stuff, the accountability of the 75% out of wedlock kids, and those are the initial problems that are causing the lower things. Why do we keep putting these boxes in front of everybody's name? Why are you African American instead of American American?
So here's the funny thing.
Yeah.
I never voted for what to be called.
Right.
I never voted for that.
Okay, right.
So
But why does that keep all the boxes?
you know why all the boxes.
It's all government
To
breaking
keep
it
us
down.
to keep us divided, right?
Yeah.
And so as long as we keep this mindset of division, then that stuff continues to be perpetrated. Right? So there are unwed mothers in white families.
Yes, there is,
Right?
but not at the rate
Well, thank you. Yep, bless you as well. So what I'm suggesting is if we don't look at if we pay attention to the numbers and not the rate, we recognize that is equally as big of a problem as it is in so-called minority communities, where we spend an exorbitant amount paying attention to the minorities and not looking at the majority. And for another example of this kind of political agenda stuff that gets set up is that there were tons of people who wanted to undo Obamacare, but they did not know that Obamacare was the ACA. So they want to keep the Affordable Care Act, but they want to get rid of Obamacare. Calling the Affordable Care Act Obamacare was a political strategy to undo the Affordable Care Act. So now there are people who are upset that they're getting rid of the Affordable Care Act because they didn't know it was Obamacare, right? So there's all of these little tricks to keep us divided that get played, and the more we play into that, the less effective that we are as a group. And so for me, I do mentoring. I do mentoring with white kids. I do mentoring with black kids. I do mentoring with Hispanic kids and Native kids because they're all my kids. And so the more of us do that and reach across those lines, I think those lines become blurred and they get rid of. I mean, we can get rid of those lines.
Just accountability is all I'm asking for.
Yeah.
All across the spectrum.
Yep.
That's all I'm asking
And
for.
yep. And yeah. So I can't disagree with you. I cannot disagree with you. So, well, thank you for coming to me.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for listening to my little story.
Yes, ma'am. No, it was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Would you like a little copy of it?
Yes, ma'am. If you have one.
No, I don't, but I could, if you give me your address, I can send you one.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Linda.
Actually, all of my information, well, it's kind of little, so I should write it big.
Were those your pencils or somebody else's?
They're the center's
Okay,
pencils.
thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Nice meeting you.
Very nice meeting you.
Yes. It's a wonderful story.
Have a great day.
She didn't know what she was missing, did she?
She never got to meet my grandkids.
Wow. Yeah, but I'm glad that you turned that around. You know, you turned that around. So,
I loved your story.
thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank
I
you.
got two awesome questions for you.
Yes, sir.
All right. So I use some of this information when I teach at St. Thomas. I teach graduate studies too. But will you talk to me about, we always talk about disparity in the criminal justice system. But sometimes we don't drill down into some of the stuff that we really need to talk about. I got some thoughts, but I'm interested in yours. So they're disproportionate, they'll say. But in Minnesota, our homicide rate is extremely disproportionate. To a great extent. how come we don't have that dialogue?
Well, because it goes back to what I was talking about in terms of proximity, right? So, proximity crimes is actually what this stuff is. So even these homicides, they're not going way over somewhere and murdering somebody. It's usually somebody that they know.
But if black lives matter,
Yep.
why don't we talk? Because I honestly believe it's more than proximity. I mean, I think it's family dysfunction. I think it's graduation rates.
Yep.
I think it's education.
And I think those are all. I think those are all
Because they're all
proximity.
lumped in.
They're all
Proximity.
locked in these proximities with low property tax values.
John
Property
been a
taxes
teacher
are
here.
used to fund schools. So if I had low property tax value,
John.
we get low funding for schools.
Why don't we look at those systemic issues? That's really frustrating to me.
Because you know why. That's long-term work. That's hard work. That's hard work, and that's the kind of stuff you and I do. These young folks don't have time for that, right? What I'm saying is,
That's right. Well, it's just a given.
their activism is to spur people to come talk to us.
What's your degree in?
And then my second question is, I know you talked about officer involved shootings. Do you think that some of the ones, especially like the catalyst, where they got a lot of the facts wrong, and then we see this terrible thing, and then we get the facts and we go, oh my, that's not
And there'll be lots of,
100%
there'll be
what
lots
happened. Maybe we got about 30%.
Yep.
I think it's a distractor for when we really have a good case.
Yep.
Where we need to hold people accountable,
Yep.
and then we fall back on this. But see, we were right back here.
he's been to
The other thing is, I think, and I'm hoping that
Ecuador. It was
I'm
Joy
hoping
that was in Peru. I can't
that your
remember.
brothers
I mean,
figure,
kids, they
brothers
all
and
been
sisters
all
figure
over
out how to
the
do this more
I
effectively,
mean, we didn't.
which
No.
is
We get to Minneapolis.
create transparency where you can be transparent and not hunker down behind what the public refers to as the blue line, right? Because what,
You know, and some of it is the law is complicated.
right, yeah.
And we get pushed back. I mean, I get this now. If we get a shooting, you're gonna be there for us, chief. I mean, you're gonna be there for us, right? I'm not gonna be there for anybody. I mean, I'm not my role. I can't tell you that unequivocally. Because if you do the wrong thing, I can't be there for you.
Right.
But so but then at the same time, you got the other side saying, give it all to us. I mean, I got Pell Run, I got contract law, and I got all this, and now it's like, well, you're not being transparent, chief. Well, it's like, I want to be, but I'll be the guy that gets sued.
Right.
If I give up, I mean, so it's very kind of frustrating.
And it's frustrating when things are taken out of your hands, right? So when the union, when the union has this bargaining power that says, get this guy back or this girl back, and you're like, no, in your head, but you know you can't say no. That's a problem. So the other thing is, so I don't know how you feel about this, but as a person who's not an officer, I think unions have to play a better part in accountability
Well, for
for
heaven's sakes, that's called.
the monitoring of people who are on disciplinary actions.
Oh, I couldn't agree more.
You know.
We have to fight. Now take, even add like a veteran's preference or something. I mean, literally it can take a year. And we're like, we just don't want this person. And sometimes we do the right thing. And then another player says, well, you gotta take that person back.
Yep.
And we're like, oh,
Did you get all your pencils
my
back?
heavens.
And I think that those conversations are the part of the transparency that when it can be talked about,
Oh, so you didn't have too far to go.
community members are
And
hungry
it
for,
still
because they don't
must
understand.
be
They're like,
30 outrage.
we thought you had our back, chief. Why isn't he back on the job? And I had to explain to some friends. I was like, at some point it gets bigger than the chief.
Oh, much so.
Because it's the, whatever. So,
Well, and sometimes, I can't speak for all of us, but 99% of us are always trying to do the right thing.
Always.
I mean, and depending on what part of the country you're in, there's just levels of, we're one of two states in the entire country where we require education. Our pay is much better.
Yeah.
I mean, New York is talking about, we're learning how to do arm bars and getting tasers, and we're like, we live 20 years or more. I mean, so you're right. the wheels sometimes turn really, really slow. But what happens is we end up getting into all kinds of.
And the other thing that I think is interesting is that LA and New York become the poster children when it's places like Minnesota that were really doing good policing.
Right. Yes.
But we look to these coasts who, you know.
Well, thank you for saying it. And the only reason I said I agree with you, I just made that comment about when the president had his 21st policing initiative. Why do you pick the worst possible places to go to say how to fix this? Oh my gosh, there's hundreds of places that have figured it out. They may not be, LA, they may not be New York, but there should be some big cities, some mid-sized cities, and some small cities. Go and say, how are you figuring this out?
Yeah.
How in 6 years do you not have one racial bias complaint in your community? How's it possible? What are you guys doing? Getting them involved, talking, listening.
Yep. I don't know if you know.
Respect.
Do you know Nadu?
I did.
Yeah. So he over Columbia Heights.
Yep. I counted those.
Wonderful man. Engage with him and his staff and community. So there was a church that was complaining that their Hispanic church members were getting pulled over all the time by the police. So instead of just blaming the police, they invited the police to have a conversation. You know what the police did? The Columbia Heights police did? They came in and they brought resource officers to help, and community people to help people understand not only the laws, but if you need stuff fixed, either on your car or blah, 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 here are people to call that community resources that will get the stuff fixed on your car so you don't get pulled over. And
Because I've had to do that before. It's not just to support person. Doesn't matter even race because it transcends across. They didn't graduate from high school. They got a low-paying job. They buy a piece of junk car. They get stopped for a tail light out. They can't pay for it. They can't fix it. So now they're DAR. They don't have a driver's license. They keep driving by the same officer in a town of 30,000 people that goes, "There's Bob again. Why are you stopping him 9 times?" That's why I got back to that systemic problem.
Yeah.
We need to fix that so the cop ain't blamed for doing their job.
Right.
We need to, as soon as we get that person a halfway decent job, they can fix their car, get them the resources, they're gonna go work.
Yeah.
They're not gonna be a problem.
yeah. No, I'm glad you're at St. Thomas.
You're not the problem.
Well, I graduated. I got my master's from St. Thomas.
Oh, you did?
So yeah.
So nice.
So sweet. So yeah, no. So that's.
And mine's in public administration, leadership, and education.
Okay, cool.
So
When'd you come out?
I graduated in 2003.
Okay, so I came out a couple of years after you.
So we're pretty close.
You're pretty close. Right?
So when did you say you had that up in the cities you were gonna get together?
Oh, the 23rd.
Okay.
So January 23rd. So if you could join us, I'd appreciate it. It's at 7 o'clock.
Okay.
No, 6 o'clock.
Okay.
And we'll do. I think we'll do an hour or 2 hour conversation.
And what location?
It's at SPNN, St. Paul Neighborhood Network.
Okay.
It's their studio. If you just type that in.
I'll do my very best.
Yeah, please
Thank
do.
you so much.
I really appreciate it.
You have a great night.
You
Drive
too.
safe on the way back.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Andre,
Yes.
I'm Luke.
Hey, Luke. Good to meet you.
Nice to
man.
meet you.
Good to meet you.
So, I have to say I haven't given a lot of thought to Black Lives Matter, but today I was listening to an interview with a guy named Larry Elder, and he was saying that the problem isn't so much racism and implicit bias as it is the breakup of the family. And he was looking at statistics from 60 years ago where nearly all children were born in wedlock and had a mother and a father. And today, 75% of black children are born outside of wedlock. And he was saying that this is the real issue, the breakup of the family, and it's not so much racism. So I was wondering what your take on that was.
I think it's probably a combination. I think one is connected to the other. In that, it's always interesting to me, particularly so my family is my mom, her mom, and her mom. So I'm 3 generations removed from slavery. And in slavery, this idea of having marriages was shunned. right? So we want, you know, I don't want to make it crass or crude, but we want breeders, right? We don't need these families. So in 3 generations, we move from that to having, and in those 3 generations, some other things that are very interesting that also occurred, right? So women were not in the household during that time, right? So kids became latchkey kids, which is interesting. During World War II, women got a taste of a freedom that they hadn't known before, which was working and getting in money, blah, blah, blah. And so society is also shifting because in white families, by numbers, not percentages, but by numbers, the same thing could be said true for white people, right? And so whenever, you know, we want to look at, so we can use numbers to tell whatever story we want to tell.
Yeah.
Or bend them or whatever. So I think part of it is recognizing that there are some systemic things. That is not all systemic. There are some personal choices that are being made and need to be made, and to recognize that people have the right to do that. Simultaneously, we've said as a society, there are certain things that we won't allow. And unfortunately, that idea of the 13th Amendment and the criminalizing of a particular group of people having laws, and here's the funny thing, those laws that were established, that are the black codes, have not been repealed. They've stopped being used in many cases, but they've never been repealed, right? And so those practices have morphed into some of the things that we see. And so people, again, so that's what I'll offer. I'm starting to spin.
Sure.
'Cause it's
Well,
getting
I
late,
appreciate
so.
the perspective. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you, Luke.
Do you have Netflix?
I don't. No.
Oh, find somebody that does. Watch the documentary and it answers your question too.
Yeah. Or you might be able to even find it on YouTube. Do you do YouTube
Yeah.
or clips or whatnot? Because people have done some annotated kind of comments about the film.
Sure.
So, cool. It was
Thanks
good
a
to
lot.
meet you,
Yeah,
Luke.
good to
Thank
meet you, Andre.
Good to meet you as well, man.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome,
I
man.
found this to be so interesting. This is my grandson.
Oh, good.
He was over here from Mankato.
Oh,
He said, yeah, come on over. There's a real interesting event going on tonight. Come on along.
Good. We're gonna come over to Mankato this summer, I think.
Over there.
Over
Are you?
there.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. We'll have to be aware of when that is.
Yeah, I have to let you know or contact you in some way. Maybe I'll have Stephanie share that. But I have a contact at St. Peter's, so I'm over there doing work in Owattana and stuff.
Nice.
Yeah. Are you over there?
Yeah, at MSU.
Okay, so what program?
I'm majoring in geography, Spanish, and international.
Oh, sweet. You did good.
Yeah, well, I know. I'm proud of him. Yeah, I've got several that are in college, but you're graduating now. You're already graduating.
That was wonderful.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
No, not a problem.
Don't worry about emailing
Yeah,
too much.
for whatever reason, so it's online, but I couldn't get it to open on the Wi-Fi, so I don't know if it was strong enough or whatever, but,
Yeah. Do you have a card or something that I could email you the link?
yeah,
Or if you want to send me an email.
you know what, it's on the bottom of my, it's on my
Okay, I'll
handout.
grab one of those.
Yeah. Yeah, it's in my handout.
All right, perfect.
So, I really had to go late when I was, because I was looking at the audience, I was like, so I went to Nipsey Russell, to Lawrence Welk,
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
I
Right.
was like, I can't hit him with
Yeah.
too much stuff.
No. Yeah, because the chief, I asked him before this went on. I says, "Have you watched?" Because we had another speaker, Donovan, who's with the justice system on Rochester.
Okay.